Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today, it's evening for me, but I'm going to go to Australia where it's daytime. And I'm going to talk to a guy that I talk to quite a bit. It's Dr. Brian von Hertzen, and he is an expert on many, many, many things, especially oceanic things. And I need to know more about the ocean. So, hi, Brian. How are you?
Greetings, Meta. Just fine, thanks. Greetings from down under. And how are you doing?
All right, very good. So now let's just start off with you telling me about something I kind of heard with one ear. I was busy doing something else when we were on a webinar together the other day, and you were telling people about some new project or grant proposal that you put in that you were going to do something I thought it sounded very bold and stuff. But yeah, and then I thought I need to talk to him about this. So let's cover that. And then probably I have a lot of more fundamental, sort of basic questions about the ocean that we will get to after you give me a briefing on what it was that I sort of missed, but I got enough to know it was hot stuff.
Well, perhaps you're referring to marine permaculture, which is our effort over the past decade to really work to identify the nutrient value chain gaps that exist in the ocean and how they could be addressed, particularly during times of climate disruption. Now, in our economy, we use value chains to describe how goods flow from one point to another and how revenues are made and sustainable businesses provided. But in nature, they don't use dollars or cents or currency to keep track of things. It's all about nutrient flows. And that is, where is the nitrogen flowing and where is the phosphorus flowing and where is the carbon flowing in terms of food and energy. And of course, it all comes from those autotrophic plants, those photosynthesizers that create trees and plants and food out of thin air. I mean, literally, these plants are fixing carbon out of the atmosphere, creating carbohydrates, and they need nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and other things. And then all of us animals just live off those plants. And, humanity kind of forgets that we get all our food from the rest of nature, that without photosynthesis, we don't have any food and we'll all die. And the other part that we forget is that every other breath comes from the ocean. Every other breath, half the oxygen that is produced in the sea. And thus it has a profound effect. And that means half the food is in the sea as well. And so when we look at how do we regenerate healthy climate, we have to consider what produces enough food productivity for up to 10 billion souls and up to millions of species who are on this ocean planet Earth spaceship along with us.
About 60 years ago, or 70, when I was a young woman, I worked for a woman who was a chemist at the University of California in Berkeley, and she was trying to understand the chemistry of photosynthesis. And I wonder, as far as I know, nobody's ever figured it out. I'm not sure she ever made any progress, but nobody can do artificial photosynthesis, can they?
Not directly. There is a new technique that uses photovoltaic cells to produce hydrogen. And the hydrogen can go into a beer vat, call it precision fermentation, but it's basically a beer vat. And they've discovered a type of microbe that can eat hydrogen and produce your favorite food stuff. So they can produce protein, they can produce omega-3 fatty acids, they can produce all sorts of other things. And so that trend of precision fermentation is probably one of the greatest hopes we have for feeding humanity this century.
Yeah. Okay. You've changed the subject completely because I didn't know there was any connection whatever between precision fermentation and photosynthesis. However, I signed up about 5 years ago to be on the mailing list of something called Solein, Solein, and they seem to be people who are developing this precision fermentation, and they send me pictures every now and again of a very delicious looking food that their chefs have whipped up. It looks really good, but I can't buy any, and I didn't know that it involved anything like photosynthesis. Wow.
Well,
So
I have
we've
two
gone.
references for you on it, and the first is George Monbiot's Regenesis book, and that one is very good. And then Tony Seba, Solar Trillions, he taught clean tech at Stanford, and I took one of his courses. But he has YouTubes describing
Mhm.
the economic disruption that will occur first in the dairy market and then in the cattle or beef market with respect to the lowering, exponentially dropping cost of precision fermentation. It used to cost $1 million a kilo to grow a kilo of protein. That was in the year 2000.
Mhm.
And by 2010, it had dropped to $10,000 a kilo. By 2020, it had dropped to $100 a kilo. And by 2030, it'll be $1 per kilo.
Well, I have watched some of his videos, and I find the man fascinating, and I want to know more. But I haven't seen anything that he's produced lately in the last few years. So maybe if you're in touch with him or see other things that he's doing, put me onto it because yes, I think I knew that he was promoting precision fermentation. Another person that I know is Gwyn Dyer, and he's mentioned precision fermentation too. He's a friend.
Wonderful. That's excellent. Well, I think it's a great hope for humanity.
Hmm. Okay, so I derailed you before you even got started. Let's go back to your project. Tell me what
Yes.
you're planning to do, or you're already doing some of it, aren't you?
Yeah, we have half an acre of seaweed cultivation with deep cycling, which gets the nutrients in the Western Pacific in the Philippines. And we were talking about nutrient value chains and how nature keeps track of the economy, if you will, through the nutrient flows that go between species and between ecosystems. Well, that's all fine and good, except, uh, you know, 93% of global warming goes into the ocean and is heating up the ocean today. And that's one reason that we're seeing unprecedented warming of ocean temperatures, 1.5 to 3 degrees Celsius above normal.
Hmm.
And it's partly due to that and partly due to some recent changes by the International Maritime Organization.
Hmm.
Um, and what we need to do is understand that when you have a warm surface waters, you're creating a barrier to the supply of nutrients from the deep ocean. So there's the deep ocean below 100 meters deep has has unlimited amounts of nutrients.
Hmm.
And that's between 100 and 4,000 meters deep. There's loads of nitrogen, there's loads of phosphorus and micronutrients. These normally are upwelled during wind events and other, even hurricanes. There's a lot of upwelling that occurs, and that supplies the deep nutrients to the surface, and that provides microalgae and macroalgae seaweed with the nutrients they need to create carbohydrates, just like you do on land. So they get their supply from the deep ocean. Now, when you create a warm lid of ocean water on top of all those nutrients, there's a bigger energy barrier to upwelling than there was previously. The net result is less upwelling, less nutrients, and an algae die-off, which means when we're fishing tuna, we're fishing from both ends. All the big fish are being taken, and the food supply of the small fish is being taken because there's less photosynthesis. By some measures, 30 or 40% less photosynthesis in the subtropical and tropical oceans, which is the biggest part of the ocean today than just 60 years ago. So what we try to do is fill or address that nutrient value chain gap between the deep water where the nutrients are and the surface where the seaweed is.
By pumping it up or by sprinkling goodies on top?
Well, pumping it up is what we call bringing the mountain to Muhammad because it takes sometimes 1 million cubic meters of seawater a day to irrigate a full hectare. It can be done and it's good for the ecosystem, but it's that is a big process. The alternative is bringing Muhammad to the mountain, and that is taking the seaweed at the surface and lowering at night the seaweed platform to below the thermocline, below the nutricline, to where the nutrients are. And at night, the seaweed acts like a sponge and soaks up all the nutrients into its tissues. And at sunrise, we lift the seaweed back up to the surface where it can absorb sunlight and carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea during the day.
Okay, now I believe you have the seaweed attached to some sort of structure, right?
We have
Obviously.
rings and ropes, and those rings and ropes hold that the seaweed has something called a holdfast, which keeps it in place. That's the beauty of seaweed is you can hold on to it. And that means you can grow a crop and you can harvest the crop after 45 to 90 days.
Let me see. It will wrap around something like you put a, a life buoy out there or something, and it will cling to it or twist around it or something.
The seaweed will hold on to a rope, for example, and it will grab the holdfast will hold on to it, and the rest of the seaweed will grow out the top towards
Okay.
the surface
Now
or
this,
down.
I was, I think I know I watched something of yours a couple of years ago. Didn't look like that. That you had like a raft, a platform,
Mhm.
and you had seaweed attached to that. But I believe you had some kind of pumps that you were bringing up water at that point. The upwelling thing that we were creating, is that right? And you gave up on that, am I guessing?
Well, I wouldn't say gave up on it. I think if you want to restore an ecosystem, the upwelling is a pretty good way of doing that for seaweed forests and even for coral reefs because it can cool those coral reefs during the difficult summer months. If the objective is a sustainable food production, food, feed, and fertilizer, then this platform behind me is a large ring. It's 1,000 meters in diameter, and it goes down every night and comes up every sunrise. And it provides that deep cycling, as we call it, that provides the nutrients at night and the sunlight and carbon dioxide during the day.
Okay. And now, all right, so now you got this stuff, and what good is it? Tell me this. We're talking. I think the word algae covers all kinds of oceanic plant life, right? And some of it is microscopic, but yours is big stuff, like I see behind you, right?
Yes, microalgae is the plankton in the ocean, and macroalgae is the seaweed, the multicellular plants that are some of the oldest multicellular plants on the planet. They've measured some seaweeds more than 1 billion years old in fossil records, and those are red seaweeds, and they're also green seaweeds and brown seaweeds, and those include kelps. Some brown seaweeds are kelps, and these are great for food, feed, and fertilizer, and a dozen other uses as well.
Mhm. Okay. I've heard even that some people think they can make a substitute for plastic out of it. Is that right?
Yes, PLA and other plastics are can be derived from a biomass feedstock, and that can include seaweed as a feedstock.
Mhm. But your plan is to use it to attract fish so that fishermen can come, or fisherwomen can come and take them home with them. Is that right?
That is one application, and even today we see a lot, dozens of seaweed, or rather, I'll say sardine fishermen that actually utilize some of the habitat here. And you've got some sardines over my shoulder, and they will fish for those sardines at night and other times. And it's a great way to build habitat and food supply for those herbivorous fishes.
Hmm. Okay, but mostly, I'm trying to amplify your message. Tell, suppose you are trying to explain to first graders how are you going to help save the world from global warming with seaweed. What would you tell them? Because that's about
Well,
my level of comprehension some days.
climate disruption is first and foremost a food security problem. You know, we grew up on a planet that could provide a food supply for many billions of people, but we're now careening towards an ice-free world. And as we do that, sadly, the productivity of that planet is maybe more appropriate for 1 billion people than 10 billion people.
Mhm.
So, first and foremost, it's about maintaining food security during times of climate disruption. And that's what we're faced with today.
Now, I bought a bag of seaweed powder because I was really trying to. You influenced me to believe that I could do it, and it's still in the cupboard. I did one spoonful, but I can't say I really liked it. Do you expect people to actually start living on off seaweed? Large numbers of the population will start using that as their main source of nutrients.
Oh, I think it's going to be a combination of seaweed and vegetables and protein from precision fermentation, possibly fish. And that's quite sustainable. I live on a pescatarian diet and I've been eating seaweed several years, and look what's happened to me.
Okay, well, I guess you're all right. I haven't
Not
inspected.
dead yet.
Okay, so you're thinking of it as not a way to reverse or do anything to control the climate itself, but only a way to survive in the midst of a terrible climate crisis, right?
Well, I think we can clarify this. There are three major legs of the climate triad, and that is emissions to zero, 2,400 gigatons of carbon removal to get us back to pre-industrial levels, and climate repair. And I'm happy to report that marine permaculture contributes to all three legs of the climate triad. Now, on emissions reduction, what we can do is produce agricultural biostimulants. These are agricultural amendments and supplements that can increase the yield of flowering crops and broadacre crops by 15 to 30%, while reducing the need for nitrate fertilizer in particular by 20% or more. What this means is that we can feed the world with 20% less fossil fuel fertilizer in the future. And that's really key because nitrate fertilizer uses up 1.5% of all energy consumption on our planet.
Oh, wow. I
It's
had no
huge.
idea. Mm.
So we could maybe even get that below 1% if we find some really effective ways of doing it. And really the seaweed biostimulants act as a fertilizer multiplier that multiplies the effectiveness of the, the nutrients that are available in the soil.
You've got the
Yeah,
triad, you've handled emission reductions.
right. Now, when it comes to carbon removal, it's important to note that with our supply of deep nutrients, the seaweed comes up at sunrise and starts absorbing sunlight and carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea. And you've probably seen white caps and bubbles in the water and things of that sort. Well, that is the atmosphere equilibrating with the ocean, the carbon dioxide level, and all the other gases. And so the top meter of the sea is in equilibrium with the atmosphere on a weekly, if not daily basis. And so those white caps are performing an important ecosystem function, and that is air-sea gas exchange. And that's all to say that when we draw down carbon dioxide in the top meter of the sea and fix it into carbohydrates, we're also drawing down carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere.
And
And
where does it go?
well, about a quarter of the seaweed falls off our platforms during growth and sinks 1,000 meters a day to the abyssal seafloor, where it remains for centuries, except it's usually eaten by fish and by microfauna at the bottom of the sea. And when it's eaten by fish, they digest it, they turn it into carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide at the bottom of the sea reacts with the calcium carbonate sediments to form calcium bicarbonate, which has a lifetime in the sea of 100,000 years.
That would hold us a little while.
That'll hold us. I think so. And so for every square kilometer of marine permaculture that we plant in the ocean, we can see up to 8,000 tons of carbon dioxide removal from this effect of the quarter seaweed that falls off during growth, and probably 10,000 tons of reduced emissions because we didn't have to produce as much nitrogen fertilizer to fertilize our terrestrial plants. And that means 20% less nitrous oxide emissions from the soil, a greenhouse gas with 300 times the greenhouse gas multiplier of carbon dioxide. And that's worth about 12,000 more tons of avoided emissions because of the seaweed intervention. Total is around 30,000 tons of carbon removals and avoided emissions per square kilometer per year of marine permaculture.
Okay. Well, that I think a lot of people would say that was pretty good if you're sure you have a use for the stuff. I mean, you're not going to have all of it dropping to the bottom of the ocean. So presumably somebody's got to make some money from it somehow.
Definitely.
Tell me how you're going to do that.
Well, it starts with agricultural amendments like seaweed foliar biostimulants, and there are billions of hectares that need effectively irrigation with seaweed foliar biostimulants to increase yield and decrease the fertilizer required. So that's a great start. Then it turns out fish love to eat a lot of the seaweeds that we're growing on our platform, and feed supplements for aquaculture and for livestock is a big deal. And so while those cows are belching methane, we can actually provide them with seaweeds that at less than 1% feed supplement can cut 90% of their methane. So that's a big deal.
But
And the third,
there's only one or two kinds of seaweed that'll do that, right? It's not like all of seaweed will do it.
no, there are one genus called Asparagopsis that is very good at it, but there are other species that produce the active compounds, the organic compounds as well. So different quantities, different feeds and speeds, but a variety of seaweeds can provide good feed supplements. And the third is direct consumption of seaweed. It turns out seaweed is one of the original sources of long chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA, and DHA. And it turns out for brain health, people need lots of EPA and DHA. In fact, a third of humanity has the ancient allele of APOE4, that's the Alzheimer's gene. And that third of humanity needs to be off a Western diet and needs to be eating a lot more omega-3 in their diet. That means fish and seaweed and related products.
Now, hold on. You just opened up a whole new world for me because I read stuff and I hadn't heard anything about this. Several little nuggets of news you've just given me that there is such a thing as an Alzheimer's gene, that a third of the people have it, and that this stuff will neutralize it. Did I hear you right?
Well, it's called APOE4. That's the name of the allele of the gene. And believe it or not, 100,000 years ago, every person on the planet had the Alzheimer's gene.
And what has happened?
Well, in the last 20 or 30,000 years, we've evolved other genes that enable us to eat grains with a higher omega-6 content. But 100,000 years ago, when there was a bottleneck in South Africa, we were living by the coast and probably eating shellfish and seaweed and clams and fish and other things. So it was a very high omega-3 environment, and we were okay. But did you know that America, Australia, and India are countries that have the lowest 10% of bloodstream EPA and DHA of all the countries on the planet?
No, I didn't know that. There are a lot of things I don't know.
Because we're not big fish eaters. And so if you don't get that nice marine source or azolla, which is a freshwater plant that also produces it, you don't have the source of EPA and DHA. And the net result is our brains need plentiful supply. And of course, if the Alzheimer's genes, it gets oxidized. And unless you've got a plentiful food supply of it, that third of humanity is at risk for late onset Alzheimer's. And of course, that's the second leading cause of death for women and the third leading cause of death for men, only behind COVID.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know some friends who are on that track. But okay. I take these things called krill things. And somebody told me that I was eating the whale's lunch and I should stop it. That I'm taking nutrients away from the whales. Is that true?
Only indirectly. I have an alternate framing of this, and that is perhaps in an economics of scarcity, that would be true, but we envision a tribe of abundance around the planet. And that means grow more algae and grow more krill and grow more whales.
So,
So if we
but krill
increase,
only live some certain places. I think they live mostly around Antarctica, and that's where the whales get them, right?
yes, that's right. And, pre-industrially, we probably had 2 orders of magnitude more whales than we do today.
I know. It grieves me because I've read that and okay.
And it turns out the whale poop fertilized
Mhm.
the algae growth. And there's a huge amount of missing iron down there. And there's pretty good indication that the whale poop supplied iron and other micronutrients to the sea. And that was immediately taken up by the algae, which gobbled up the iron and the other micronutrients and grew like gangbusters and fed enormous seas of krill, which then provided a huge food supply for the whales.
Mm.
So we need to get back by a factor of 100. We need to get back to that pre-industrial level of whales,
Uh-huh.
whale poop, algae, and krill. So
Yeah,
I would say instead of eating less krill, let's grow more algae and more whales.
sounds good to me. I did a talk show with some experts on whales. In fact, two shows about them. One guy is especially an expert on whale poop, which was very interesting. Okay. All right. Now you've got this like a almost a kilometer, or you've got a large uh, big circle of some kind that you have algae growing on. Uh, Tell me, where is this thing and how does it at the moment? What are you doing with it that's commercially attractive? Are you trying to get investors interested in building many square miles of this? And if so, where would you do it? And what's your game plan?
Yes. Well, we're in the Western Pacific. The Philippines, the second largest city in the Philippines, is called Cebu, CEBU. And we're just northeast of there in the Camotes Sea. And we're growing, the ring was 1,000 square meters, and we now have 2,500 square meters. And that is of a rope-based seaweed array that goes up and down. Every morning it goes up, and every sunset it goes down. And that is what we're producing. Our first product is a seaweed foliar biostimulant for rice. Philippines, it turns out, imports more rice than any other country on earth at over 4 million tons of rice per year. But
Oh,
with this one intervention, we could help the rice growers in the Philippines to the point where the Philippines could become a net rice exporting country. That's how profound this intervention is.
this is by using it as a fertilizer.
It's a fertilizer multiplier. We just apply 1 liter per hectare per week, and that's enough to transform the the rice production with a reduced fertilizer and get higher yields. We've done nearly 100 trials so far and gotten excellent results.
Do you spray it on the ground or what?
We generally spray it on the plants in the morning while the stomata are open. Those are the little pores in the plants. And you spray it on in the morning while the stomata are open, and the seaweed biostimulant goes into the stomata and upregulates the gene expression of the plants and improves the uptake efficiency of the NPK fertilizer and minerals that are available in the soil.
Mhm. Okay. So you were mentioning the other day on that webinar or whatever it was that you have a proposal in the works that you're trying to do something on a larger scale. Is that what you were talking about? Or
Well, it is marine permaculture, and we've talked about 2 legs of the climate triad, but it's also important to talk about the third, and that is climate repair. And why do we need to do that? Well, sadly, it's been 40 years, and we have not decreased our emissions. We've increased them. And we haven't removed that much carbon, even a gigaton, really. And we need to do thousands of gigatons. So while we're trying to get our carbon budget back in balance, we have to preserve a livable planet. And for that, we look for nature inspired solutions. So it turns out that historically, clouds have done a great job of keeping the planet cool. In fact, I would say that these popcorn marine clouds that show up in the subtropics and the tropics and all parts of the world um, reflect sunlight and keep the planet cool. It's nature's way of keeping the Earth cool. So now, NASA has just published a study within the last 12 months documenting the decrease in marine stratocumulus clouds over the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, profound decrease on the equator with the International Tropical Convergence Zone, ITCZ, and moderate decreases that have occurred between the subtropics and the temperate zones. The net result is we're on a dimmer planet than we were just 20 years ago. And that decrease of reflectivity from clouds, the decrease in clouds and the decrease in reflectivity is having a profound effect on heating the ocean, to the point where Professor James Hansen has determined that our rate of global warming has doubled in the last 15 years. Before 2010, the average was around 0.18 degrees Celsius per decade. And now it's averaging more like 0.36 degrees Celsius per decade. That's a doubling of the warming rate in the last 15 years.
I believe, tell me if I'm mistaken, because I think in passing, I came across something in which he said that the albedo effect is more important or accounts for more of global warming than carbon retention.
Yes, in terms of what we could do in the coming years and what could be done, most importantly, when voters demand that people do something about the unlivable conditions. Mm-hmm. This is the option of rebrightening our marine clouds that political leaders could use to protect their municipalities, their cities, and their regions from the ravages of climate disruption in coming years. Now, it's a convenience in the global north where we'd like to be cooler, we'd like to keep our temperatures and preserve our ecosystems, but it's a matter of survival in the tropics, where we're looking at wet bulb temperatures exceeding 30 degrees Celsius. The chapter 1 of Ministry for the Future, a terrible scenario where millions of people die from overheating, that's a realistic possibility in Asia and other places. And in fact, there's a international competition that the Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, Temasek Group, has created, the Singapore Livability Challenge 2025. And one of their leading tracks is cooling Earth, because we have to figure out how to rebrighten our planet. Our proposed solution is to rebrighten those marine clouds, get us back to where we were 20 years ago, and keep our oceans and our planet cool enough to sustain life for the difficult decades to come.
Yeah, well, I think I know I've read that a major source of this change has been the decision by some maritime organization to tell all ships to stop using bunker fuel or something, which was emitting aerosol, which created clouds. Now, the question I guess I have is, I've been hearing more about these ship tracks as causing this greater heating than any other explanation. Is that the main explanation, or are there other factors involved in the great dimming of the planet that has been taking place over the last decades?
Professor Tapio Schneider at Caltech has documented how a warmer planet has fewer clouds. And so as the planet warms, there are feedback loops that decrease the cloud cover. So we have to compensate and address that. And we need to address the overreaching of the IMO, that International Maritime Organization. It was one thing to cut the aerosols within 200 miles of land. And that, there are issues with sulfate aerosols that, produced by fossil fuels, and it can affect the health of millions of citizens near shore. But the lifetime of these aerosols is only about a week. And so when it's probably a reasonable thing to cut those aerosol emissions near shore. Further offshore in international waters, it's had an enormous side effect, and that is the unprecedented heating of the oceans. We call it the new abnormal because there is no new normal when it comes to the oceans. You'll notice at the beginning of 2023, when these regulations went into effect, the ocean temperatures increased dramatically to the point where the North Sea sea surface temperature anomaly was 5 degrees higher just 6 months later. And the first coral reef I ever dove on, the Sombrero Reef off the Florida Keys, died in August 2023 because the ocean temperatures reached 101 degrees for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
That happened just 6 months after the regulations went into effect. So could we rescind those regulations in international waters on the high seas? Yes, we could.
Yes, but I would think it would give you some hint about how you could even augment the change beyond just restoring the sulfate emissions. Why don't we have a special airplane that flies around sprinkling something that will have the same effect?
Well, we could do that. It's expensive to do a dedicated airplane, but it's easy to use ships of opportunity, which are 100,000 ships sailing the seas. And why not, if we can't use the original aerosols, why not use benign sea spray and cloud condensate? And there are benign aerosols associated with the seaweeds behind me that we found naturally produce cloud condensation nuclei for marine clouds and help to rebrighten those marine clouds themselves. And so I think a combination of those could do a great job of providing benign aerosols that near cities or on ships could actually rebrighten our oceans and rebrighten our planet.
Okay, sign me up. Tell me how people can support this initiative. I'd really like to see a lot of attention given to the possibility. I'm doing what I can with interviewing you and trying to spread the word. But is there any organized campaign to try to reverse the decision of this? Is it IMO, and to not only reverse it but to use it as a tip on how to speed up global warming by really putting more clouds back up there than we had 5 years ago?
Well, we could slow down global warming if we do that. The Healthy Planet Action Coalition has written an open letter to the IMO requesting this. That letter needs more attention. And I think it's something, in other words, we should attract more IMO attention to the letter and to these associated documents and work. We have to be realistic. It takes years, if not decades, to get this kind of political change going, usually. However, in the meantime, there's more we can do. We have a volunteer nonprofit organization called rebrighten.org, which is focused on people who want to volunteer and contribute to rebrightening our planet. And so rebrighten.org is the place to go. We're helping to sponsor it through our Climate Foundation. And we are hoping that we can build the kind of grassroots support that is going to make a real difference when it comes to rebrightening our planet and ensuring a healthy climate for humanity and 8 million other species that can't vote. And the Climate Foundation is the parent organization, and those are both available on our website. You can just Google the Climate Foundation and Google rebrighten.org, and I'm sure they'll be able to find it that way, and we're happy to give you the links.
Yeah, you're the head honcho on the Climate Foundation, right?
Well, I did found it, and I'm the executive director, and we have a wonderful team of volunteers from around the world and 24 staff, including a dozen in the Philippines, who are working steadfastly to develop marine permaculture and the foundations, the 3 legs of the climate triad that are going to get us back to a healthy climate.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Well, it's always great to talk to you because this is only one of your many activities, benevolent, good activities to fix the world. So I appreciate hearing about this one, and I certainly am glad you're doing it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Meta. It's a real pleasure.
Okay. See you another time soon. Take care.
Will do.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Bye. Bye.